Hey everybody, welcome to our DAT IQ weekly market update. This is our update for August 12, episode 351. I'm Dean Croak, market analyst here at DAT, and along with special guest Vishnu Rajamanickam, all the way from Valencia in Spain. Vishnu, great to see you again.
Nice to meet you again, Dean. It's been a while.
Yeah. For those that don't know, Vishnu and I used to work together at Freight Waves. Now, were you journalist number 1 or 2 after Brian Strait?
I think it was number 2. I mean, it was the same week where 3 journalists came in, so I'm not sure if it was 2 or 4, but definitely in the top 5.
Yeah. You were, when I first started there, you were like one of the most prolific writers that Freight Waves had, because I think you were pushing out stories every day, right?
Yeah, kind of. I think there was initially I think I was doing like 4 stories a week, but then I think it was 2019 when I was like on a roll. I did around 400 stories that year. So it was like a crazy amount of work back then. Yeah, true.
And also edited some of my bad writing.
No.
I knew what I wanted to say, but my Australian English kind of screwed things up. For those that don't know you, tell us a bit about what you're doing in Spain.
Oh, so in Spain, so it's just, I mean, to put it short, I'm just living the Spanish dream, essentially. So I was living in Germany before. I think, Dean, we met each other when I was in Germany, right? So, maybe I can give a little bit of introduction, right? Like you mentioned, I began my career at Freight Waves, and I was like one of the early journalists working at Freight Waves. I was a freight tech reporter back then. I was also kind of doubling up as the European correspondent. So I kind of was running in and out of conferences and trade shows in Europe, and I've bumped with Dean in person many times in some of these shows. And so I started out there, and then so I moved to Spain kind of at the later end of my Freight Waves time at Freight Waves. And the reason I moved was basically because I didn't like the German weather so much, and because I come from India and I come from a beachside city, which is like hot and humid. So I kind of was missing that sorely after like 5 years there in Germany and in north of Europe. So I just moved to Spain. It was also during the time of the pandemic, so I was not really sure if I would stay here. But then over time, as everyone does, like most expats here, you just grow into Spain, and in my case, Valencia. So I've been here since then, and I've built my life here, and I don't think I'm gonna move anytime soon.
Good for you. We've written some wonderful pieces around the US freight economy. So we'll dive into those a little bit later with some pretty interesting discussions, including that one you've done on the company in Denmark. All right, so I'll bring Vishnu back a little bit later. Let's dive into the freight market update for this week, some of the key trends we're watching. Spot rates continue to follow seasonal trends, although directionally the post-July 4 fall-off that we normally see hasn't been nearly as big or fast as it typically is. I'm not sure what that means just yet. We need a few more weeks of data. But the general consensus is that flatbed, dry van and reefer rates are holding a little bit more firm than they would have in normal years during August, which is when we typically see rates decrease fairly consistently. I'm not sure what it means. We're going to watch as this market continues to rebalance. Zach Rogers, the Logistics Managers Index, came out, modest decrease by 1.5 points to 60.74. Transport capacity remained largely consistent. The overall consensus from Zach was that the gradual freight recovery is continuing to be in a holding pattern. That's a trend that we've seen much of 2025. The US Freight Back Index came out. It was up 2.4%, so some positive momentum there. It was up 2.4% in second quarter compared to the first quarter, but shipments did decline almost 10% year over year. So while still negative, there was some positive news there, but the recovery remains uncertain with all of the trade headwinds, of course, that we've been talking about. And lastly, ACT Research reports came out on new truck orders. The for-hire market continues to be beleaguered, way down by Class 8 truck orders, which are down for about the 11th straight quarter in terms of the profitability of the carriers that are placing those orders. The actual number of new trucks in the Class 8 sector total 13,300 units, down about 1.9% year over year, and July well below replacement levels. That's an alarming trend there on the large carrier side. The long form version of this report will be out this evening at dat.com/market update. Let's dive into some of the trends we're seeing after a significant surge in volume at the end of the month. The dry van load to truck ratio was about 5.67 last week. There was a slight reduction in carrier equipment posts. Load posts were down about 15%. But again, exactly what we'd expect in the first week of the shipping month after the bump that we see at the end of each month. In the refrigerated market, load post volumes, significant drop last week, down 20%. Produce shipments that drive a lot of reefer load posts down 3% nationally, according to the USDA. Load to truck ratio at 9.57 last week. And lastly, in the load to truck ratio segment, flatbed saw a 30% decline in volume last week. It ended at about 21.03. That's the load to truck ratio. Slight upward tick in carrier equipment posts, but really pretty much what we'd expect there year over year. Having a look at some of the rates, this is our look at spot rates year over year. After remaining flat during the second half of July, dry van line haul rates started August down a penny, averaging $1.64. That's about 2 cents a mile higher than the same time last year and about 5 cents a mile higher than in 2023. So you can see it's starting to make some separation between the downward trend of those prior 2 years as we head further into August. The average rate on DAT's top 50 lanes by load volume remained unchanged at $1.99 per mile. That's excluding fuel. That's 35 cents a mile higher than the national 7-day average spot rate. And lastly, in our 13 key Midwest states, or bellwether states as we call them, which represented 46% of national volume last week, they're a very strong indicator of national trends. Spot rates were up a penny on 17% lower volume of loads moved last week. Carriers earned an average of $1.87 in the bellwether states. That's 23 cents a mile higher than the national 7-day. Having a look at the refrigerated market, after holding steady through the latter half of July, same as dry van, reefer rates also fell by a penny last week, settling at just over $1.95. That's about 2 cents a mile lower than last year, but about 1 cent per mile higher than 2023. And lastly, in flatbed, this is excluding fuel, also nearly a 4 cent per mile decrease last week. Quite the trend there, down $2.03 per mile after 2 weeks of remaining flat. So the current rate stands at about 7 cents a mile higher than last year, though. And about 8 cents a mile higher than in 2023. All right, let's have a quick look at our forecast. This is our ratecast forecast going out 35 days for long haul loads over 550 miles. Remember, this excludes fuel, so it's line haul only. The blue is the historical 7-day moving average. The green is what ratecast is expecting out 35 days. And it's bounded by some forward-looking upper and lower bands in yellow and red. So in dry van, ratecasts expect rates up 2 cents a mile out to a September 11. We're starting to get into the early part of September where seasonality starts to lift rates through the holiday season. Rates are expected to be about $1.67 per mile on September 11. That'll be about 6 cents a mile higher than where they were last year. The low case has rates down 4, high case up 9. So ratecast for the last 2 or 3 weeks has been showing some renewed strength in the market. Not sure yet if that's reflecting the increased rate of carriers exiting the spot market just yet, but certainly the last 2 to 3 weeks of strength in the forecast is being underpinned by some market fundamentals that seem to be holding on the capacity side. In the refrigerated market, ratecast thinks rates are up 3 cents a mile out to 9/11 at $1.98. That'll be almost identical to where they were last year. Low case has rates down 2, high case up 8. And lastly, in flatbed, out to 9/11, ratecast thinks rates will be up 6 cents a mile. Down 6 cents a mile at $1.96. That'll be about 3 cents a mile higher than last year. So after a fairly strong first half of the year where rates were in the 12 to 15 cent per mile higher than last year, that gap has started to narrow down to about 3 cents by the time we get to middle of September. And I'll be right on where it pretty much is every year around that low point before winter starts to lift volumes and rates. Low case scenario down 9, high case up 3. All right, so that's the rate forecast. So let's bring Vishnu back in. My old boss was Vikas Jain. Vishnu, question for you to get started. The second punitive 25% tariff on Indian imports takes effect in about a couple of weeks. What's your take on the impact of the second 25% once it gets to 50?
Totally, yeah. I think it's a pretty big bombshell, to be honest, in India, because I think we need a bit of context here, Dean. So, um, basically around the political situation surrounding President Trump and Prime Minister Modi in India. So, even during the first term of Trump, Modi was openly supporting Trump in his bid for the 2020 election. So he
Mm,
literally came down to the US and did this Howdy Modi rally, and he was like openly asking for votes for Trump. And
right.
when Trump got elected this time, there's a pretty genuine expectation amongst not just the people, but also within the Indian government that he'll act kind of favorably towards
Mm,
India. But then you could see that, like, you could also see that through businesses, right? A lot of companies from the US, they started
mm,
moving, diversifying out of China,
yep.
notably Apple, which moved pretty much most of its smartphone production into India and assembly into India. But then, so what happened now is
Mm,
it's a pretty much a kick in the gut for the BJP government in India.
mm,
But then again, India has always kind of shown restraint in the way they respond to these attacks. And so PM Modi hasn't actually come out and taken out the name of Trump, but then which is something that China does, right? Like China is very vocal against all these tariff plans, but
mm,
India is kind of like, yeah. So PM Modi in the last week has shown by like, like his tweets, even though he's directly not attacking Trump, he has spoken to Putin.
mm,
He's gonna visit China in the next couple of weeks after like 7 long years, and China and India have not had a great relationship for decades. But then this is kind of like a situation that US has created where it's kind of alienating the largest democracy in the world, and
mm,
it all these measures kind of risk pushing India closer to China and Russia,
right.
and it actually destroys a lot of goodwill that's been built between India and the US over the last couple of decades. Because remember that India has always tried to stay non-aligned to right from the time of Cold War, and they've looked at the US with and still look at the US with like gray tinted glasses,
Mm,
due to all the real politic, right, from the 1970s, from Kissinger times.
mm,
And so since then, they've slowly started like getting aligned with the USSR and now Russia.
mm,
And also the whole idea of Trump asking India to stop, buying oil, cheap energy essentially from Russia
mm,
is a bit of a problem, because India desperately needs this
yep.
very steady supply of energy, and India has also done a bit of dirty work for the US and Europe, because they were the ones refining most of Russia's oil and selling it back to Europe, because Europe had its commitment to not buy directly from Russia.
Right.
So all this happened over the last few years, and now, when India was kind of expecting Trump to kind of pat them on the back and reward them, but it's essentially the other way around. So the 25% tariff that's already there is already creating problems. So for instance, I was talking to my mom yesterday, and she was saying that the price of eggs have come down drastically. And I was doing a little bit of reading around it, and apparently, egg exports from India to the US has grown substantially in the last couple of years. So just last year it was like a 49% year on year growth. So and it so my state, I come from a state called Tamil Nadu, which is in the south of India, is also one of the largest exporters of eggs outside India. So I assume that all these fresh produce and
Mm,
yeah, so fresh produce is it's gonna directly reflect in prices, because a lot of it is being dumped back in the domestic Indian market.
mm,
And in terms of overall trade, I think India is one of the key import partners for US in electronics,
mhm,
general medicine, generic medicine, and clothes and apparel, so textile
wow,
industry.
right.
So this is going to be a problem, because again, local media was reporting how retailers like Amazon and Walmart have all paused exports from India, and this is only going to get worse if the 50%, I mean the next 25% also comes in, which according to Trump, based on the timeline, is going to be August 28th. So I reckon that if the US and India don't sit down and talk this through, it could kind of cause irreparable damages to US-India relations for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Who knew that people could change their mind, and things like China could actually increase their global market share as they decrease the amount of exports to the US? Who knew that would happen? If only someone had told us. Of course, all this is entirely predictable, Vishnu, and I love your insights on this. But one of the things that we've been following here is, of course, if India is forced to buy crude from, say, OPEC or OPEC plus, the market is expecting that price of crude would rise. And if it hits $80 a barrel, the broad math tells us that that'll push diesel prices up about 20 cents a gallon if a cost of a barrel goes up 8 to 12. So the market's kind of pricing this in. Is there any sense that's what's going to happen, that they actually will do that and try and get more volume, less from Russia, more from the OPEC countries?
I think so. Yeah, that's a good observation in the sense like India is actually, so it's just like Europe, right? Like at least Europe was talking the big talk, like trying to stand up to Trump. But then eventually, if you see what happened in the last month, the a lot of Europeans are really displeased with how the European Union has folded. And I think that's going to be the case with India also. India, again, PM Modi being the strongman that he is with the right-wing politics that's happening in India over the last decade, cannot has to save face for in India, because the opposition is all on this case, and they're saying that India shouldn't be intimidated and intimidation can't work against India. But the devil is in the details, right? Like you can say all that you want, but then we are seeing, at least from reports, that many of the large refineries in India are stopping or halting or reducing the amount of oil imports they're doing from Russia. So which means eventually they're gonna buy from the OPEC or OPEC plus. And like you mentioned, it is definitely gonna increase the price of fuel. And yeah, the market is, I believe, understands that this is gonna happen, and it's gonna make sure that this is like phased in. But I think, yeah, it's a tricky future that we don't really understand, because again, like you mentioned, things keep changing every day. And we don't know if if I would say that that India and US would sit down over the next few weeks, because I'm sure alarm bells are ringing in Washington, because India is like very openly moving towards Russia and China. And China has never supported India for at least for the last decade. And now it's openly supporting India, which is a bit funny for me being an Indian, because we've had border skirmishes for ages now. And so it's kind of like an enemy of an enemy is a friend equation, which I don't really prescribe to. But going by what's happening, I see there's no way out for India. It's like it's being stuck between a rock and a hard place, really.
And of course, the reason we're talking about this is this will affect diesel prices at the pump for our truckload carriers, particularly spot market carriers that don't have a fuel recapture program. Diesel prices are quick to go up, slow to come down. And it was only 3 years ago, diesel was $5.83 in the summer. 3 years ago, pretty much to this month, because of geopolitical risk. That was when Russia invaded the Ukraine. I don't know that we'll see that kind of level of change, but who knows? We're in a pretty volatile market right now. Very good insight on that front. Let's shift gears to talking a little bit about minority truckers. English language proficiency has been very topical. You've written about this. You, in fact, introduced me to the subject when you wrote that wonderful article back in 2018 on the Punjabi drivers coming out of the West Coast. I've seen them since then, Vishnu. I've been watching them diligently decorate their trucks, become a real force on the road. A lot of teams. They run a lot of produce out of California in particular. They run back and forth every week. These are very big mileage truck operators. What's also interesting is when I travel I-80, which is where they run a lot, I'm seeing Indian food locations pop up. Some are mobile vans, others are proper restaurants that are catering just to that demographic. So it seems like it's a significant part of the freight task. You've got some numbers around that. We had the head of that association on Radio Nemo a little while ago talking about English language. And of course, in your home country, it's the second language, most spoken language, right?
Yes,
other than
it
Hindu?
is.
Yeah.
It is the linked language
Yeah.
because again, India is more like the European Union because we have, or probably even bigger in terms of diversity, because we
Mm.
have two, three times the population
Yep.
and a lot more languages,
Right.
right? So we have 22 official languages and I don't know 500 dialects
Right.
and minor languages. So essentially, the linked language is English. So
Mm.
you would see, I think India is also, if I'm not mistaken, has the maximum, like the largest number of English speakers in the world.
Correct. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was kind of interesting that that subset of the population was lumped in with these are the drivers that are causing low rates and the excess capacity in the market, which of course is far from the truth. We did a look at this, and of course, and I think the target was not so much against the Indian drivers, although they've been getting their fair share of criticism from both my home country, Australia, and here, for all the wrong reasons, of course, as you and I know. But I think some of the drivers from Northern Africa were incorrectly targeted back in March, and of course, this didn't start as a federal program to improve the literacy of the 65 million Americans who are considered illiterate. It didn't start there. It started with truckers in Arkansas. And of course, that tells you all you need to know about what was behind this. And from day one, I was very vocal and said, this is a nothing burger. There aren't enough drivers that can't speak English that will move the needle. And I said, because for 2.5 decades that I've been here, we've been actively recruiting minorities here and overseas. So it's no surprise that we have on our highways a very strong population of multi-generational minority truckers. And of course, some people don't like that for all the same reasons that we've been seeing in the last few years. So we have this English language proficiency comes out. Early numbers that we looked at for the first testing period out of like 400,000 inspections were 1,220 drivers were put out of service, which is like 0.3% of the total driver population because they couldn't speak English. So it was never going to move the needle. It was one of those distractions that the trucking industry tends to get involved in. And of course, it didn't lead anywhere because the market hasn't changed. It's following the same sort of seasonal trends that it always does. What are you seeing from your perspective? Because a lot of your countrymen have been incorrectly targeted here in this whole recent round of truckers allegedly not being able to speak English.
Sorry, I think, I mean, it's a very unfortunate turn of events, right? Like, and also this is a tale as old as time. Dean, like when things are going tough, like the going gets tough, it's the minorities who get targeted because it's much easier for politicians to cash on minority hate to get votes, right? So and also, like, like when you pointed out Punjabi truckers, it's also important for us to give like the scale at which they operate, right? Like, I was just pulling up some numbers, and it was like super astonishing even for me that Punjabis are around 300,000
Yep.
in number in the US. So that's like 0.1% of the
Mm-hmm.
US population. But then the American Punjabi Trucking Association put out a claim. I mean, I haven't verified if the claim is true, but I guess it's probably in the ballpark. So they mentioned around roughly 20% of US truckers are Punjabi Sikhs.
Yep.
So that's like 0.1% moving one fifth of the cargo, which is crazy to me, right? So, and
Yep.
also disproportionate high number of trucking companies and drivers in California are Punjabi. So I assume the number is going to be even larger in terms of percentage in California. And you
Absolutely.
mentioned that they bring in a lot of, or move a lot of agri produce, and I think it kind of connects back to India itself, because Punjab, like the name Punjab, translates to the land of five rivers. And
Mm.
essentially, that kind of tells you what kind of place it is, right? It has a lot of really good look. It's a great place to grow crops, and they have like so farming is such an integral part of being a Punjabi.
Mm.
And so they are more prone to owning tractors, trailers, trucks to move produce in and out of the state. And so you see, even in India, it's not a coincidence. They are also in India some of the community that runs a lot of trucks.
Mm.
And so when they move out of India, and this is something that's kind of I don't think just specific to India, but generally minorities outside the country generally tend to bandy up and they help each other.
Yeah.
And it's this network effect that has kind of
Yep.
taken over, because if you see, for instance, with motels, you have another segment of Indians, the Gujaratis, who've taken over a lot of motels
Mm.
in the US, and it's
Yep.
the same thing here. So basically, like you get a lot of Punjabi youth who immigrate to the US, and they have relatives and friends who train these newcomers, help them with CDLs, finance, dispatching, helping them understand compliance, which
Yep.
kind of lowers entry barriers, right? Like for a millennial in the US who does not have like connections to the industry, it gets a bit daunting for them to get in, because also it's not an easy business to be in, right? And also Punjabis have culturally been a pretty mobile community, so
Mm.
they have a pretty disproportionate presence in the Indian military right from the British times. They've heavily migrated outside the country, and I think we've spoken about this before. They run these programs like the Khalsa Aid, which provides like humanitarian aid across like conflict and disaster hit regions in the world. So when there are like hurricanes hitting the US, you would definitely see Khalsa Aid giving out packages and helping people. So
Mm.
they are a kind of community that's always been, like I said, mobile, and trucking essentially fits the bill, right? So yeah, that's with Punjabis. And again, it's like, like talking of Punjabis and an extension about what's happening with all these unfortunate events. I just feel that it's that America is kind of losing its sheen, in the sense that like it has always been a country which is has opened its borders to people with grit and determination, who've always wanted to build something for themselves, like entrepreneurs, people with dreams, right? So these are people with a lot of dreams, and we don't need to look at them as refugees, which they aren't, but then they are people who really feel that they can contribute something and do something. They're like hardworking people, and this is the kind of people that America has cherished for centuries, and
Yep.
that has made America what it is today, right? So if America starts to slip from its ideals, it's gonna be, I mean, like not a great future because of this, right? So I believe that a lot of skilled labor, and also like people who were destined to the US, are probably going to move to some other countries that would welcome them, and that's
Yep.
kind of a net loss for America as a whole.
It's always already happening. The brain drain, whether it be Canada or to China. And as an immigrant, I've been here 25 years. It's a very different country to the one that I moved here for. And I think we are suffering because we're seeing tourism numbers down. I've got two of my relatives that would have both been here in October on vacation, and spent a total of probably $30,000 on a vacation in the US. Said no way in the world are we going anywhere near the US. It's too risky. So, which is sad when you think about what's an ally like Australia and people thinking like that, because a lot of people don't realize there's a massive US military installation right in the middle of Australia. And we are, been very close allies. But when it comes to immigration, it's a very different viewpoint, and that's frightened a lot of people. Vishnu, we're kind of bumping up on time here. I did want to talk about this project that you were involved in. You mentioned you went to the slums in Delhi. Was that part of the baton transport project you were doing in
Yes.
Denmark?
Yes, so Baton is this just a introduction, right? So they're a trucking company based in I mean they're a European trucking company. They have many bases, but they're like Danish, German, in like as an establishment. So I had this, so they're one of my clients. I write for them, and they had this interesting proposition, which was like when I was visiting India, they said we have a lot of drivers who are moving from India. So essentially, this is the thing, like just like in the US, Europe also has a problem with recruiting and holding truck drivers.
Mm.
And Baton had this idea of trying to empower women, specifically women, at least that was my project, to get women from underprivileged and underserved societies, and train them, get their licenses done, and then move them to Europe and get them to work for them. And
Mhm.
so essentially I was So they asked me to go and talk to this cohort of women drivers who had already trained and were like ready to leave India
Right.
to Europe.
Right.
So the idea was to create these stories around how they managed to get in touch with Baton, how they, how was their experience training for this, and what are their expectations once they move to Europe, right? So essentially, I did understand, like, I myself don't come from money, so I come from a pretty lower middle class family in India. So I was kind of expecting these women to have like similar or somewhere close to the upbringing I had, and I was like super shocked because the it was like it shattered all my ideas of how poverty can literally suffocate you, right? So when I was there, like three of the ladies that I like, their houses were in the slums of Delhi, so I went to their houses, and you could not it it's worse than the nightmares you could have. That's how I could describe it. Like, their houses, like most of their houses didn't even have toilets, like no working toilets. They had to use the public toilets, and public toilets are not so clean in India. And these women were like, four people in a house which is like 50 square foot. It's nothing. You just have places to stand and just roll around to sleep in the night. So it was incredibly small houses with like such difficult living. And remember, in Delhi, temperatures can go up to like 50 degrees Celsius, which is, I don't know, 150 Fahrenheit, 120 Fahrenheit. And also pretty cold, brutal winter. So these houses obviously didn't have a lot of ventilation because they're like crowded. And so it was like very revealing to me to understand, like, for me, like when I went into these houses, I thought that if I had this kind of an upbringing, I would probably be like, I don't know, I would be nothing. I felt that these women were way more had a lot more, again, grit and determination compared to what I had when I was growing up. And there's this, for instance, there's this girl who was all of like 20, 21 years old. She was, I remember her smiling from one end to another, and I was like, how do you even, like, it was, I was just thinking, like, how do you even muster a smile if you grew up in such squalor, right? And then this girl had was supposed to go to Budapest. I mean, she's already in Europe. That was like 1 month after, and I spoke to her mom, who was like beaming. Essentially, she said that our daughter is gonna save us, like she's gonna literally take us out of poverty.
Oh,
And it
really?
was, yes, it was incredible. And then this girl was saying that her aim was not just to help her family, but to be an inspiration to all the girls around in that community, to show them that just because you're a girl. So this is another thing, right? Because of multiple levels of patriarchy, like economic status, these women are probably like the lowest levels of all, including casteism. You have so many problems in India,
Yeah.
and a woman coming from the depths of all these problems, coming out in itself is kind of like a lodestar to many other girls who are growing up there. And she was saying that, like, it was very endearing to hear her talk about not just her struggle. She, in fact, she kind of downplayed her struggle, and she was talking about how she can grow and help everyone in her community to grow, and just be that inspiration, right? Which I feel is sorely missing in politics today, and also like in communities at large, that we've kind of like forgotten that they're like segments of the society that is struggling so hard to come up to a level that we kind of take for granted.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a pretty eye revealing.
Now, is
Yeah.
she working for Baton Transport?
Yes.
Oh, okay. What sort of work is she doing? You know?
So she's a truck driver. As far as I know, she was destined to Hungary, and I believe that she was driving. So this is a couple of years back. Maybe her work details changed a bit, but it was between Hungary and Bulgaria.
Oh, fantastic.
Mhm.
Fantastic. What a great story. I mean, humanity is pretty awful even at the best of times, right?
So,
But it's fascinating as I listen to you talk. Being an immigrant, I look at people that are different, and I don't see people through color or language, right? Because I'm different. But I guess to a lot of people who have a certain disposition, everybody's different no matter what. and I mean, I don't have to say who they are, but we kind of know. But to all of us that have been on the move all of our lives, people are people. Like most people, I said to a lot of drivers here that are very anti, Punjabi Sikh drivers from Russia, from the Eastern Bloc, Northern Africa. He said these are mostly hardworking people just trying to make a living and get by. Like they're doing one of the hardest jobs on the planet, and you railing on them is not going to make any difference. It's just a poor reflection on you, and but it's a kind of a no-win argument, right? You know, like
if people can realize that there's a lot more in common with the immigrant
right.
than not,
Yeah.
I think the world would be a better place.
We yesterday here in our town, Manchester by the Sea, north of Boston, our corner store has been taken over by a couple of guys from outside of Delhi, right? So in India, and I kind of spotted the language. And it wasn't Karnataka, right? But it sounded a bit like that. And I asked them what dialect it was, what language. Anyway, long story short, we got talking about cricket. And that's the great unifier when it comes to Australia and talking to India. It's been a great talk about the Test series between England and India and how
it was one of the best series I've seen by far.
Yeah, so I think that's a good way to end this discussion. I love having you on. This has been really helpful. We'll get you back on again. I think there's more we can talk about when it comes to the minorities in our industry. But Vishnu, before we go, how can people contact you if they wanted to get you to write some articles for them?
Totally. Thanks for the time, Dean. It's always a pleasure talking to you. So connecting with me is easy. They can connect with me on LinkedIn. If not, my email. So it's Vishnu@storeskip.com. It's STORSKIP.com.
We'll make sure we get that in the bottom of the link. All right. Thanks, Vishnu. A couple of call outs. The ACT Research Market Vitals Conference is coming up August 20. It's only a couple of weeks away. I'll be there as one of the guest speakers. I'm also on Radio Nemo, Road Gang Radio. Each day it's on from 7 a.m. Central on iHeartRadio, Facebook, YouTube Live. I'll be on this Thursday with Jimmy Mack again. Freightbind podcast is out. He's talking to one of the partners from Kearney about the State of Logistics report. Next week's show, we've got Marcus Womack from Outgo about their recent acquisition by DAT and what's in store for carrier factoring. Don't forget, CVSA 7-Day Break Safety Week is next week. Make sure you set up alerts for our live show and subscribe to our channel. With that, another show is in the books. Thanks for watching. Be safe. Be nice to everyone. We'll see you back here again at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific next week.